The morning sun was shining softly over the small southern town, painting the streets in gold. It was just another regular day for the people at Jefferson First National Bank. The employees were dressed neatly, tapping on their keyboards, counting money, and smiling at customers who walked in. Everyone knew each other in this town, and the bank was a busy but quiet place where nothing strange ever really happened. Then the front doors opened, and something unexpected happened. A very old black man walked in slowly. His clothes were faded, his shoes were worn out, and he had a long gray beard that touched the top of his shirt. But the strangest thing about him wasn't his old clothes. It was the sack he carried on his back. It was an old, brown, dusty sack that looked like it had been through decades of rain, sun, and hard times. People inside the bank stopped what they were doing and stared at him. Some gave polite smiles, others looked confused. A few even frowned, a little. It wasn't every day that someone like him came into a place like this. He didn't look like he had money, and this was a place for people with neat suits, nice cars, and strong handshakes. The security guard, a tall man with a square jaw, stepped forward a bit. He didn't say anything, but his eyes followed the old man closely. One of the younger tellers, a woman named Claire, whispered to her coworker, "Do you think he's lost?" But the old man didn't seem confused or nervous. He walked slowly, but steadily toward the reception desk and said politely, "Good morning, young lady. I'm here to speak with the bank manager." Claire looked at him, surprised. "About what exactly, sir?" He adjusted the sack on his back and smiled gently. "About this bank. It belongs to me." There was silence. For a second, Claire blinked. Then she laughed, a soft, awkward laugh like she thought he might be joking. Some of the others who had overheard turned their heads. A customer behind him raised an eyebrow. Someone chuckled from the back office. Claire leaned forward a bit. "You mean you want to open an account?" The old man shook his head slowly. "No, child. I mean, I want to talk about the ownership of this building." Now the laughter was a little louder, not mean exactly, but full of disbelief. A few people couldn't help but smile at what they thought was just a confused old man saying something silly. One guy in line even said under his breath, "Well, I own the moon, but..." The old man didn't seem bothered. He just stood there patiently, his back a little bent, holding onto the sack with both hands. He looked around at the people staring, but his eyes were calm and kind. There was something in his face, something strong, like he had seen too much in life to care about a few giggles. Eventually, Claire said, "Okay, sir, one moment," and picked up the phone to call the bank manager, Mr. Ronald Grant. She whispered quickly into the phone, trying not to laugh again, but Mr. Grant told her to send the man in. The old man nodded politely and walked toward the glass-walled office at the back, where Mr. Grant sat behind a big desk with shiny awards and thick folders. When he stepped in, Mr. Grant stood up. He was a tall man in a dark blue suit, hair perfectly combed, with a voice that made people listen. "Good morning, sir. I'm Ronald Grant, the branch manager. How can I help you today?" he said, offering a hand. The old man shook his hand with a firm grip and said, "Name's Elijah Reed. I've come to talk about this bank. I believe it stands on land that belongs to me." Mr. Grant raised his eyebrows slightly but kept his professional smile. "Is that so?" Elijah nodded and gently placed the sack on the floor next to the chair. "I brought some things that might help explain." He slowly opened the sack and pulled out a bundle of old papers. Some were wrapped in cloth, others tied with string. The edges were yellow and fragile, but everything was clean and carefully kept. Mr. Grant leaned forward with interest as Elijah placed them one by one on the desk. "I used to work this land, back when it wasn't full of buildings and banks, just open fields, trees, and the Cartwright farm," Elijah began. "That was nearly 70 years ago." Mr. Grant said nothing but listened closely. "I was just a boy when I started working for Mr. Henry Cartwright. He owned the land, hundreds of acres, and I worked the fields with my father. Times were hard, we were poor, and there weren't many options for a black man back then. But Mr. Cartwright, he was different." Elijah carefully unfolded a paper that looked like a will and pointed to the name at the bottom. "I helped him when the Great Depression hit. helped him save this place when others walked away, and in the end, he told me I'd be rewarded. Mr. Grant took the document, his eyes scanning the neat handwriting and old stamps. It looked old, very old, but it also looked real. He gave me a piece of this land in his will, said, "Elijah, you've earned this." I never did much with it, worked my whole life, watched as buildings rose, cities grew. Then one day, I found out this bank was sitting on my piece of earth. Mr. Grant looked through more papers, land deeds, tax records, old letters with fading ink but clearly written names. There was even a signed note from Cartwright, calling Elijah a brother in all but blood. "I don't want to cause trouble," Elijah said softly, "but I do want the truth to be seen." Outside the office, the bank staff tried to peek, through the glass wondering what was going on. Claire bit her lip, unsure whether to laugh again or feel guilty for the earlier joke. The security guard stood nearby, now watching with more respect than suspicion. Inside, Mr. Grant leaned back in his chair, staring at the papers. He didn't speak right away. He knew this wasn't just some wandering man telling tall tales. These papers were serious. If they were real, and they looked very real, it meant something big, something no one expected. He looked up at Elijah and said, "Mr. Reed, if these documents are authentic, you may be sitting on one of the biggest surprises this bank has ever seen." Elijah just smiled gently, his eyes calm as a quiet river. "I've waited a long time for people to stop laughing. I'm not in a hurry." And in that moment, Mr. Grant knew this was no ordinary visitor. The old man with the dusty sack had walked in from the edges of memory and history, and he might just turn the entire story of the bank and the town on its head. No one laughed anymore. The news about Elijah Reed's claim spread quietly at first inside Jefferson First National Bank, then beyond its walls into the town. At the bank, things began to change. Where there was laughter and jokes before, now there was silence mixed with curiosity and unease. The staff and customers who had seen Elijah come in with his old sack and make his claim now looked at him differently. The legal team had finished their investigation and confirmed the truth. Elijah Reed was the rightful owner of the land under the bank. This was no longer a simple story or a funny rumor. It was a serious reality that could change everything. Inside the bank's office, the mood was tense. Mr. Ronald Grant, the bank manager, sat at his desk, staring at the papers once more. He thought about the years the bank had been on this land. Decades of business loans, meetings, and deals. No one had ever questioned if they really owned the land beneath their feet. And now, that ownership belonged to Elijah Reed. The bank's lawyers had recommended a quick response. They wanted to prevent any legal battles, bad publicity, or financial damage. The bank's board was called into an emergency meeting. The executives, dressed in their sharp suits, spoke in low voices, worried and confused. "We can't just ignore this," said one board member. "If this goes public, it could ruin us." "We need to buy the land from Mr. Reed," another suggested. "Offer him a settlement before things get worse." But Mr. Grant hesitated. He had met Elijah. The old man wasn't asking for money or revenge. He was calm, polite, and carried himself with dignity. He wanted to be recognized, and maybe more than that, he wanted justice. Back at the bank, the staff's attitude shifted. Those who had mocked Elijah now avoided him or looked down in shame. A few customers came in and asked questions quietly. Some even left donations and gifts at the front desk, hoping to support the man whose story had touched their hearts. Among the staff, a young intern named Maya became one of Elijah's strongest supporters. She admired his patience and quiet strength. Every day she brought him coffee or a sandwich and listened carefully when he shared stories about the old days, the farm, and Mr. Cartwright. "You know," Maya said one afternoon, "I never imagined someone like you could have such a big story hidden inside a sack." Elijah smiled softly. "Most stories aren't told loud, child. They wait quietly until someone listens." Meanwhile, the bank's legal team continued their work. They combed through old land records, tax files, and even court documents. Each piece of paper confirmed Elijah's claim more firmly. There was no doubt left. The bank's board realized they had two choices: fight Elijah in court or come to an agreement. Fighting would be costly and damaging to the bank's reputation. An agreement, on the other hand, could turn a bad situation into a new opportunity. So the bank decided to meet with Elijah again. This time the atmosphere was different. There was respect instead of laughter. Mr. Grant greeted Elijah warmly and invited him to sit down in the manager's office. "Elijah," Mr. Grant said, "we've reviewed all the documents. We accept that the land belongs to you." Elijah nodded quietly. "Thank you for saying that." "We want to work with you," Mr. Grant continued, "not against you. What do you want?" Elijah looked thoughtful. "I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to take the bank away from the town, but I do want something important." He reached into his sack and pulled out a small notebook, worn and filled with notes. "I want to make sure this story means something good for people like me, people who have been forgotten or ignored. I want to help young black men and women get chances they never had. I want the bank to help the community, not just make money." Mr. Grant was surprised. "You want the bank to invest in the community?" "Yes," Elijah said. "Scholarships, small business loans, job training, things that can change lives." The room was silent for a moment. Then Mr. Grant smiled. "That's a deal I think we can make." As the news spread, the town began to see Elijah not as a strange old man with a sack, but as a symbol of hope and justice. The local newspaper wrote stories about him. A reporter called him the man who carried history. People came to the bank just to meet him. The staff who had once laughed were now proud to work at a bank that was part of something bigger. Maya wrote an article for the college newspaper about Elijah's story, which soon went viral online. She described how one man's quiet strength had forced a powerful institution to change and reminded everyone that respect and honesty mattered. At the same time, the bank started a community fund in Elijah's name. This fund provided scholarships to students, helped local black-owned businesses, and supported community programs. Elijah's vision was becoming real. Through it all, Elijah stayed humble. He didn't want fame or fortune. He wanted to see young people succeed and the community grow stronger. One day, Maya asked him, "Why did you keep those papers for so long? Why did you wait?" Elijah looked at her, eyes filled with wisdom. "Because sometimes the truth has to wait for the right time. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait quietly and be ready." And so the laughter that had once echoed in the bank was replaced by respect, hope, and a new beginning. The old man with the sack had shown everyone that sometimes the past holds the key to the future. Inside the glass-walled office of the bank manager, the room felt quiet but heavy. Mr. Ronald Grant sat in his leather chair, holding one of the old papers Elijah Reed had brought with him. The bank was still moving around them, people at the counters, phones ringing. But in that small office, time felt slower. Elijah sat across from Mr. Grant, calm and patient. His dusty sack rested by his feet, half open, showing even more old documents carefully folded and tied. He wasn't nervous. He didn't look excited either. He looked like a man who had waited for a long time and had learned to let time do the work. Mr. Grant looked up from the document in his hands. "This is a will," he said slowly. "It's signed by Henry Cartwright?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, sir. That man gave me the land your bank is sitting on. Not because I asked for it, not because I tricked him, because I earned it." Mr. Grant's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in thought. "This is a serious claim. I mean, land ownership, that's a legal matter. Are you saying no one ever knew about this?" "Oh, people knew," Elijah said. "They just didn't care. You see, I was a black man in the South in the 1940s. People didn't take my word seriously. Some people didn't even believe I could read." Mr. Grant stayed quiet, so Elijah continued, his voice steady. "When I was a boy, I worked for the Cartwright family. They had a big farm here. I was born on that land. My father worked it before me. We didn't own it, we just worked it. Sun up to sundown, rain or shine. No breaks, no holidays. But Mr. Cartwright wasn't like most white folks back then. He was firm but fair, treated my father with respect, taught me how to keep books, fix fences, even read contracts. Mr. Grant looked surprised. He taught you that? Elijah smiled, a bit proud. Yes, sir. He saw I was smart. Told me not to waste that mind. I was 14 when he handed me my first ledger. I learned to write reports, count feed bags, even help him pay taxes. He leaned forward now, pulling out another paper. When the Great Depression hit, most folks lost everything. Mr. Cartwright was close to losing his farm. Banks were knocking on his door, ready to take it. Most of his workers left, but I stayed. My father had died by then. I was just 17. Unfolded a crumpled yellow letter with strong handwriting. This here, he said, tapping it gently, is a letter from him to the county clerk. He wrote it the day he made me co-owner of a section of his land. Not the whole farm, just a piece. But it was the same piece where your bank is built today. Mr. Grant took the paper and studied it. There was the name, Henry Cartwright, and another name, Elijah Reed. The letter talked about loyalty, trust, and earned respect. It wasn't just words, it was a promise. I kept working on the land even after he passed, Elijah continued. But his family, his son and daughter, they didn't like me much. They thought the will was a joke, said their father must have been confused. They tried to take everything back. I didn't have the power to fight them. No money, no lawyer. Just those papers. He pulled another document from the sack. It was a copy of the original will marked with dates, signatures, and legal stamps. So what happened? Mr. Grant asked. Elijah gave a sad smile. I left, moved out of state, did small jobs, cleaned floors, drove trucks, repaired fences, kept my head down, but I always kept the papers safe. Wrapped in cloth, away from water, away from fire, because I knew the truth would matter someday. Mr. Grant was quiet. He now had a small pile of documents in front of him. He reached for his phone. I need to call someone from our legal department. This needs to be looked into. You understand, Mr. Reed, it's not that I don't believe you, but these claims, they're too important to take lightly. I understand, Elijah said. Take all the time you need. Later that afternoon, 2 lawyers arrived at the bank. One was a middle-aged woman named Diane Marks. The other was a younger man named Eric. They came with laptops and serious faces. Mr. Grant showed them the documents, explained everything Elijah had said, and asked them to check the records. Elijah sat there silently while they went through each paper, one by one. The lawyers weren't rude, but they were clearly skeptical. Where did you keep these papers all this time? Diane asked. In my home, Elijah said. In a wooden box, wrapped in cloth. Never touched them unless I had to move. You never filed any claim before? Eric added. No one listened when I tried, Elijah replied. But now the world's changed a little. I figured maybe someone would listen now. Over the next few days, the lawyers did their work. They called the county clerk's office, looked into old maps, checked land records, compared handwriting samples, and searched every archive they could find. During that time, Elijah would return to the bank each day, wearing the same simple clothes, carrying the same sack. The people who once laughed now watched him differently. Some smiled at him when he walked by. Others avoided his eyes, ashamed of their earlier jokes. One of the youngest employees at the bank, a college intern named Maya, began to take interest. She was in her early 20s, quiet but thoughtful. One afternoon when Elijah was sitting in the lobby, she brought him a cup of tea and asked if she could sit with him. You really worked this land? She asked gently. I did, he nodded, with these 2 hands, long before there was ever a bank here. She looked at his fingers, wrinkled, rough and strong. I believe you, she whispered. Elijah smiled. Thank you, child. That means more than you know. By the end of the week, the lawyers returned with serious expressions. Mr. Grant called Elijah into the office again. Diane laid the documents on the table. "Mr. Reed," she said, "after reviewing all records, we have found that your claim appears valid. The land beneath this bank, at least a significant portion of it, was in fact deeded to you by Henry Cartwright, and the deed was never legally canceled or sold. The property was later absorbed into a large development project that didn't properly check the original ownership. Legally, you're still the rightful owner." Mr. Grant rubbed his forehead. "This is going to change everything." But Elijah didn't jump or cheer. He just sat there and nodded. "I didn't come for a fight," he said. "I just came to be heard." Maya was outside the office watching through the glass. Claire, the teller who first laughed, stood behind the counter, frozen in shock. The security guard leaned against the wall, shaking his head slowly. The old man with the sack wasn't crazy. He wasn't confused. He was telling the truth all along. And now, everyone who once laughed at him began to feel something else. Respect, mixed with regret. The sack he carried, once seen as a symbol of poverty, was now something else entirely. Inside it were not old clothes or garbage, but history, truth, proof of a promise made and nearly forgotten. As Elijah left the office, that day, the whispers around the bank weren't laughter anymore. They were filled with wonder. One person said, "He's the real owner?" Another said, "How did we not know?" And someone else said, "He waited all this time and never gave up." Elijah Reed walked out of the bank quietly, the sack still on his back. The sun was setting, casting a warm light over the building that had stood for years on land that didn't truly belong to the people inside it. But now, everything had changed. The story of Elijah Reed did not end with the bank's acceptance of his claim or the creation of the community fund in his name. Instead, it grew into something much bigger, something that touched not just the people in the small town of Jefferson, but also many others far beyond its borders. Elijah's quiet strength, his patience, and his courage became a powerful lesson about history, justice, and the importance of standing up for what is right, no matter how long it takes. After the bank officially recognized Elijah's ownership, things continued to change. The old man who once walked in quietly with his sack, carrying dusty papers and simple clothes, was now often invited to speak at schools, community centers, and even city halls. People wanted to hear the story firsthand, from the man who had waited decades to be heard. Elijah's talks were not long speeches filled with fancy words. Instead, they were simple stories about his life. He spoke about the hard work on the farm, the lessons Mr. Cartwright taught him, and the struggles he faced as a black man in the South. He explained how he never gave up, even when people laughed at him or ignored his claim. Many young people listened closely. They saw in Elijah someone who looked like them, who had faced similar challenges, and yet had never stopped believing in himself. He became a role model, showing that strength does not always come from loud voices or quick victories, but sometimes from quiet determination and faith. One of the most important things Elijah taught was about respect. Respect for history, for people's hard work, and for the truth. He reminded people that many stories have been forgotten or erased, especially those of Black Americans and other marginalized groups. By sharing his story, Elijah helped bring those hidden histories into the light. The community fund named after him grew steadily. The scholarships helped dozens of students go to college who might never have had the chance otherwise. The small business loans gave local entrepreneurs the money to start new shops and services, creating jobs and opportunities. Job training programs taught skills that helped people find better work. Because of Elijah's influence, the bank became a model for community support and fairness. Other banks and organizations took notice, starting similar programs to help their own communities. Elijah's story inspired change far beyond Jefferson. Despite all this success, Elijah remained humble. He lived simply, still carrying his old sack when he went to the bank or community events. But inside that sack were no longer just old papers. They were symbols of hope and history. Elijah continued to visit the farm where he had worked as a boy. The land had changed over the years, but the spirit remained. He would sometimes sit under the shade of an old oak tree, remembering the past while dreaming about the future. One day, as Elijah was walking through town, a group of children ran up to him, holding books and notebooks. They wanted to hear more stories and learn from him. Elijah smiled and sat down on a bench with them, ready to share. He told them, "Life is like this sack I carry. Sometimes it feels heavy, filled with things from the past that are hard to carry. But inside there are lessons, memories, and strength. We must carry our history proudly, learn from it, and use it to build a better future." The children listened, carefully, inspired by his words. Not everyone agreed with Elijah or supported his ideas. Some people still held old beliefs or feared change. But Elijah did not waste time arguing. He believed that showing kindness, fairness, and patience would change more hearts than anger or fighting. Over time, more and more people in Jefferson and beyond began to understand Elijah's message. They saw that history is not just about the past, it shapes the present and future. They learned that standing up for what is right often takes time and courage. Elijah's story also reminded people that justice is not always easy or fast. Sometimes, it requires waiting, preparing, and trusting that the truth will come out. In the later years of his life, Elijah became a beloved figure in the community. He was invited to town celebrations, school graduations, and even honored with a special day named after him, Elijah Reed Day. On that day, people remembered his story and the changes he helped bring. Maya, the young intern who had first believed in Elijah's claim, continued to work in journalism. She wrote books and articles about Elijah and others like him, people whose quiet courage changed the world in small but powerful ways. One afternoon, as Elijah sat on the porch of his small home, surrounded by family, friends, and neighbors, he looked out over the town he had helped transform. The bank stood tall and proud, children played in the streets, and new businesses thrived. He thought about the long journey, from the farm fields to the bank, from the dusty papers in his sack to the community fund that helped so many. It had not been easy. There had been times when giving up seemed like the only option, but Elijah never gave up. He understood that sometimes being patient and persistent is the greatest power anyone can have. As the sun set, painting the sky with warm colors, Elijah smiled. His life was a story of hope, justice, and the strength to carry on, even when the world seemed to turn its back. The old man with the sack had changed more than just a piece of land. He had changed a community's heart, inspired a generation, and shown the true meaning of courage. And in doing so, Elijah Reed became more than a man with a claim. He became a symbol of the power of truth, patience, and the quiet strength that can change the world. After the bank accepted Elijah Reed's claim to the land, life around Jefferson First National Bank began to change in ways no one expected. The story of the old man with the sack became more than just a tale about property. It became a symbol of history, justice, and new hope for the community. Elijah didn't want to take the bank away or make anyone lose their jobs. What he wanted was respect for the past and opportunities for the future. He believed that the land wasn't just a piece of dirt beneath a building. It was part of a story about the people who had worked hard for generations, often without recognition or fairness. The bank's leaders started to listen more closely to Elijah's ideas. They saw that his claim was not just legal but moral. They agreed to create a special program for the community, called the Elijah Reed Fund. This fund was designed to help young people, especially those who had faced the kinds of struggles Elijah knew well. In the months that followed, the bank began to change its role in the town. It wasn't just a place to save money or get loans anymore. It became a place that gave back, helping students pay for college, supporting new businesses, and training workers with new skills. Elijah worked closely with the bank's staff and the community leaders. He traveled to schools to tell his story. He spoke at community centers about the importance of knowing where you come from and fighting for what is right. People in the town began to see Elijah in a new light. The old man with the sack was no longer just a mysterious visitor. He was a leader and a teacher. Children gathered around him, listening to his stories about the farm, the old days, and the meaning of hard work and dignity. Even the bank employees who had once laughed felt proud. Claire, the teller who had first been doubtful, became one of Elijah's supporters. She helped organize events and workshops that brought the community together. Maya, the young intern, stayed close to Elijah, learning from him every day. She admired his patience and kindness. She wrote articles and shared his story far beyond the town, helping people everywhere understand that sometimes the smallest voices can carry the strongest truths. The bank's new programs made a real difference. Several students from poor families received scholarships to attend college. New businesses opened with the help of small loans, creating jobs and energy in the town. People who had lost hope began to dream again, but not everyone was happy. Some wealthy landowners and business people saw Elijah's growing influence as a threat. They whispered behind closed doors, worried that this old man's story might change the balance of power in town. One evening, as Elijah walked home, a stranger approached him. The man was well-dressed but had a cold look in his eyes. He warned Elijah to stop stirring trouble and to forget about the land. Elijah listened quietly, then said firmly, "I am not here to cause trouble. I am here to remind people of the truth." The stranger left without another word, but the message was clear. Not everyone wanted Elijah's story told. Elijah was not afraid. He knew standing up for what is right often comes with challenges. He leaned on the community, the bank's support, and his own faith in justice. One day, during a big community meeting at the town hall, Elijah spoke to a crowd of hundreds. His voice was soft but strong as he told the story of his life, from working the fields as a boy to standing in that bank with his old sack full of history. He said, "This land is more than dirt and buildings. It is a story of people who worked. It loved it and dreamed on it. We all deserve to be seen and heard." The crowd listened in silence. Some had tears in their eyes. Others nodded, feeling the truth in his words. From that day on, Elijah became a symbol of hope and courage in the town. The bank continued its work, growing closer to the community. Together, they built a future that honored the past. Elijah's story spread beyond the town. Newspapers and radio stations shared the tale of the old man who claimed his rightful place and helped others rise. Through it all, Elijah remained humble. He never forgot the struggles he faced or the people who had helped him along the way. He taught everyone that patience, respect, and truth are powerful weapons in any fight. Years later, as Elijah sat outside the bank on a warm afternoon, children played nearby, and the town was buzzing with new energy. He smiled, knowing that his story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice and the power of standing up for what is right. The old man with the sack had changed. A town inspired a community and shown that sometimes the quietest voices carry the greatest power.